Welcome to Startup Success, the podcast for startup founders and investors. Here you'll find stories of success from others in the trenches as they work to scale some of the fastest growing startups in the world. Stories that will help you in your own journey. Startup Success starts now.
Welcome to Startup Success. Today we have Lisa Mikkelsen in studio, who is the head of global human capital at Lisa. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Kate. It's great to be here.
So I want to get into Flourish Ventures and kind of their investment strategy and all of that. But before we do that, I just wanted you to walk us through your background first, and kind of what led you into this talent type role at a VC firm. It sounds so neat.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kate, I studied psychology in school. I was very interested in people, but I also wanted to do something in business. So straight out of school, I got a role in human resources, basically at a startup as a HR department of one. And I was really thrown into the fire, as you can imagine, just doing a little bit of everything and sort of figuring it out as I went along, and absolutely loved it. I ended up moving around into a couple different startups and taking on that builder role and really creating things from scratch with an employee-centric kind of view. And I did that for about 10 years before getting into venture capital. And when I moved into a role in venture capital, it was pretty novel at the time. It was back in 2010. And most VC firms did not have in-house talent. So it was a little bit about, figuring things out again as we went along. But did a lot of recruiting for portfolio companies, and over time brought in more HR advisory support. And in the last 15 years now, that role has evolved quite a bit too. But that's a bit of where I got to where I am today.
Okay. And so first, if you could tell us a little bit about Flourish Ventures, and then I kind of wanted to get into your role a little more for the founders listening who might not be familiar with that role as much.
Sure. So Flourish Ventures is a global fintech investment firm. We do early stage investments in emerging markets and in the US, in companies that are really empowering change in the financial system. So creating more financial access, financial health, innovators who are looking to make sector change. So that's really what we're all about is investing on a sector change level. So not only do we do investments in startups, but we also invest in the whole ecosystem. So we do work with policy and advocacy and innovation and central banks, because as probably a lot of the viewers know, if they're working in fintech, regulation is probably one of their biggest obstacles.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's great that you kind of take that holistic approach, because that's one of the things that the fintech founders on here talk about is all the regulation that, there's global repercussions around it.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of similarities in different markets too, and being able to learn from a firm that does global investments in a sector that has pretty deep sector expertise. We hear from our founders all the time that that's one of their most valuable resources.
Okay, so that's helpful. And I want to get into now your title, head of global human capital, because it sounds so cool. But I know a lot of people listening are like, what is that exactly?
So, what is that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it's, I guess, three parts. So one part is internal HR for the fund. So I manage all of our people and talent internally. As a global firm, we're a pretty small firm, so that's a relatively small part of my day-to-day. I'd say the biggest part of my day-to-day is HR advisory for our portfolio companies. So we have something like 80 companies around the world. And a lot of the things that I support directly and advise on are relating to talent management, growth, scaling. So it's not necessarily a one-off search, for instance, but it's more like helping teams to build an internal search process. So how do they build their recruiting process? How do they revamp or create performance management? A big one that I get with a lot of our earlier stage companies is around mission, vision, and values, and how to create your company values and basically align those with who you are actually, what your actual culture is, as opposed to aspirational. So thinking through kind of cultural growth and evolution as companies grow, do a lot of kind of leadership development. Compensation's a big one that comes up globally. So basically anything in the HR realm, organizational development, that sort of falls under my purview. And then a lot of the work I do myself with our portfolio companies, or I work with external partners to find the right resources to work on a project. So that's kind of the one-on-one. I also lead our CEO retreats, co-founder retreats. So anything that's more programmatic with our founders, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little bit as we get into the topic of founder well-being. And then finally, and more recently, I've kind of changed gears into doing more thought leadership around this area of founder wellness and I'm really trying to bring investors and other groups and individuals together on this topic of founder wellness and how we can really change the culture of venture to one that is more empowering.
Absolutely. And I do want to get into that. I do have one question though, and that is not all VC firms offer this, right? This kind of HR cultural. Yeah. Because I think that's what a lot of the founders listening are probably thinking. I mean, are you seeing more of this, or is this pretty unique to Flourish?
I've definitely seen more emerge over the years.
Okay.
Certainly some of the larger funds, people often talk about the Andreessen team, which has quite a large talent team.
Right.
I think at this point, most VCs will have a sort of platform person or somebody who's working with portfolio companies, but maybe not with such specialized experience around people and leadership. But I think that's starting to change.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's such a huge benefit for your portfolio companies. And one thing before, we kind of delve into founder wellness, the cultural piece, because I've interviewed so many successful founders, and they constantly say culture, culture, culture in the early stages. Like it's not just a buzzword. I really, built one, lived it, every decision. We tried to map it with our hires. And I hear it all the time. And honestly, I never would have believed it until I started doing this show and just kept hearing it. I mean, is that something you must see a lot of, right? And is that why you're putting an emphasis there for your portfolio companies, this importance around culture? Okay.
Yeah. And I think culture is something that's often misunderstood, or, it feels very intangible. So a lot of what I try to do with our portfolio companies is create more frameworks around culture, and culture being an outcome of how you're doing things. Because everybody has a culture.
Right.
It's more a question of, are you intentional about your culture? Is that the culture that you want to create? Because if it's not the culture that you want, then there's something that you're doing that's putting it in another direction. So a lot of what we do is try to uncover, okay, what's actually going on, and where there are some differences in how you maybe perceive things and other people on your team perceive things.
Okay, I think all the founders listening should take note of that, because you said something really compelling there, is that you will have a culture regardless, right? And do you want it to be a negative? Like, what culture do you want it to be? Because I've worked for so many startups where the culture was very negative, cutthroat, just no one was supporting each other. So you're helping your founders then build a framework and get to the culture that they want, in a sense.
Absolutely. To be deliberate about your culture instead of letting your culture happen to you.
Yes, I love that.
Happen.
Yeah.
And knowing what are the levers to pull, how to take your values and your mission and what you're trying to do and really weave that into the day-to-day lived experience of your team.
That's great. I think that's such an important distinction. So let's segue into a topic that I'm really excited to talk to you about, and it's how you caught the eye of the producer of our show and then my eye, and that you had written some articles about founder wellness. So walk us through what that means, founder wellness, and why this became such a passion project for you.
Yeah. So I guess I might start by clarifying founder well-being as more kind of the overarching.
Okay, not founder wellness. Okay, good. Yes.
Deliberation, because I
Yeah,
haven't
thank you.
used these words interchangeably myself. And I think
Okay.
sometimes there's this connotation of wellness as just, oh, go to the spa or get a massage,
Yes,
something like that.
right. Yes,
But
and that's an HR buzzword right now. Like now we're offering wellness benefits. That's why it's in my mind, because our new wellness benefit just launched this today. I got the email. We have a new wellness benefit. So you're right.
which is great.
Well-being. Yes, right. So founder well-being. Okay, walk us through
Founder
this.
well-being. Yeah,
Okay.
it's sort of like the holistic experience of a founder being one that, enables some sense of work life. I don't like the word balance, but having a life outside of work, having strong relationships, being true to yourself, being true to your values, knowing what your boundaries are, knowing what you need to recover in order to boost your resilience so you can make it to the next round. Mental health specifically is a big one. And we know for a fact that empirically, research has shown that founders have predispositions to mental health conditions. And those can oftentimes be what really drives somebody in a positive way, but it can also be the ultimate downfall. So being able to know yourself and live according to the ways that are going to make you most fulfilled, successful, and aligned with where you want to be.
Okay. I like that, aligned with where you want to be. So how did this become something that you're so passionate about? Did you see a lot of this in your work, in your current role?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
it's something, it's been for me almost 15 years now in venture, working with hundreds of different founders on all types of issues around the world. And founders are some of the most committed, hardworking, innovative people in the world. They're also really burning out and under tremendous pressure, way more pressure than the ordinary person. You're not just worried about yourself and your job. You're worried about your investors. You're worried about your team. You're worried about the macro environment. There's so many things outside of the control of a founder who's, doing incredible work. So I've noticed this over the years, and actually, it was in 2019 where we decided to take a bit of a risk and go a little bit out there with our CEO retreat. And instead of making it one of these, forums where everybody gets together and talks about product market fit and pitch decks, we really shifted the focus to be one that was looking internally. Who am I as a leader?
Wow.
What do I need? What am I missing? What do I want to be doing? Why am I doing this? And that was a bit experimental because we didn't know how people would react. And honestly, pretty much almost everybody resonated and loved it and found wow, I've never asked myself these questions before. I've never talked to my co-founder about these things. And so that really kind of set into motion, I think, a domino effect in a positive way of all of these different interventions that we've tried to pull together to offer a greater opportunity for our founders to be well. And I think COVID was then another instance, which was right around the corner, totally exacerbated what founders were going through, because now all of a sudden teams were completely remote. People were working from home. How do you manage that? That was very new in a lot of situations. We were dealing with people issues, dealing with technology issues, global issues. Then on top of that, a lot of companies had to lay people off. And so there's the additional stress of that. Funding dried up. There's been all of these different chain of events that have really made things extremely hard in the life of a founder. even the ones who are doing well, because frankly, even when something positive happens, like you raise money, it's still very destabilizing because now it's like there's more pressure and you're thinking, oh, I should be happy right now. But instead, I'm just really stressed out because of what I have to do.
Yes.
So, all these different things have sort of influenced us in a way as funders that we feel it's our responsibility as funders who are backing these phenomenal entrepreneurs to be ensuring that they are the best versions of themselves in any way we can. And I'm sure we'll talk about that too, some of the specifics.
Yes, I want to get into the specifics. First, though, I mean, if you did this CEO forum in 2019 that was focused on founder well-being, I mean, that was, well before COVID, and this became more of a hot topic. I think I mentioned to you, we ran something on our blog about founder mental health, and it was to date our most widely read blog post. So that, and I think COVID brought a lot of this to the surface, but what were you seeing? Like, what are some of the signs that you saw back in 2019 that are probably still prevalent that people should watch out for or think about? And then I want to get into the specifics, because if you were seeing it back in 2019,
yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on who the audience is for that question. So like a founder some of the signs they might notice would just be, feeling maybe a little hopeless, overwhelmed, more overwhelmed than usual, having a difficult time with personal relationships. And an investor might see that there's less engagement. Maybe there's somebody sick oftentimes, or teams are turning over, or they're not getting all the information about what's happening. There can be so many different signs that might signal like, okay, what's going on here? And I think ultimately this is the life of a founder. It's never going to be an easy ride. It's always going to be a lot of ups and downs, but there's also limits to how we as humans can live our lives in a healthy way. And if you're not able to be healthy yourself, you can't build a healthy company. If you can't build a healthy company, you can't achieve your goals. So it benefits everyone when we have founders who are in a better place.
And I like how you broke that up into founders and then investors, because we have both listening. So then let's move into some of the specifics that you see are working to help, in this area on both sides. If you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so we've experimented with different kinds of programming for our founders, and that includes things like workshops. So we've done resilience workshops. We've also done peer coaching on a monthly basis. So we have a couple of these different CEO circles where they meet for an hour a month and they coach each other, they learn from each other, they share stories, because there's a lot of things oftentimes you just need to get off your chest and talk to somebody who kind of understands loneliness. And so I think they've built some tremendous bonds. And it's not for everybody, it's for some who want to do that. We've also offered coaching, which I think a lot of investors do. And then we have taken it a step further and offered more mental health informed coaching. So it's just getting into more of a kind of personal level. And all of this, of course, is entirely confidential and done outside of Flourish. This isn't something that we manage ourselves. But we just really try to make sure that there's opportunities and that we're promoting different vendors, different offerings. But I think what's, in my mind, becoming even more important than what kinds of programs and bells and whistles and swag we offer our founders is how we show up as funders. And so I have turned more of the effort internal into, all right, this is all fine and well, but we're throwing more things on the plates of already busy people.
Right, that they need to do.
Yeah. So how
like attend this session. Yes. Yes, exactly. And so I think I remember reading an article that you wrote, and I have it written down here. You said compassion, empathy, and listening, the power of all three. Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could touch on that, because that really resonated with me. Because I think that's kind of like the overarching where you want to go with this, right?
Those are definitely really important keys to showing up in a relationship, in a healthy relationship. Oftentimes when I talk, I mention this power dynamic or this power imbalance that I'm sure most founders would be nodding their heads right now, like, oh, yeah, there's the person who writes the check and the person who takes the check. And there's always this inherent feeling that the person who takes the check is somehow indebted to the funder. And it really throws off the dynamic. And when we live like that, it's just human psychology. Sometimes we maybe do things that we wouldn't ordinarily do, or we're not kind of holding true to ourselves because we feel compelled to do, what somebody else is asking for. So I feel it's very incumbent on the funders to play a role where they are adding value and not just creating work or creating busy work or making people run around in circles because they want to have a good idea or say, oh, well, I did it this way. So it's important to recognize role as funder and board member and how you can really be adding value. And one of those ways, I believe, is through just listening. Listening is really hard to do well. Active listening is a skill that can be built, it can be taught, it can be practiced. And so that's something that we are working on internally, is like how we can be better active listeners. And active listeners also, in turn, ask more empowering questions as opposed to leading with an idea and expecting someone else to follow. So listening is one piece. Empathy, also talked about that different times, and leading my team in some empathy workshops with external experts in this area. Empathy, again, it's also a skill that must be built. We have natural capacity to be empathetic as humans, but again, studies show, and I love going back to these studies because they're very fascinating, but the more you actually get into power, the harder it is to have empathy for people who are in a lower status position, which is the founder-funder dynamic. And so I think there can sadly be this sort of I paid my dues, you pay your dues
now it's
kind
your
of
turn
mentality, or no, just, suck it up and push through. And when I did this, as opposed to a real deep care and understanding for another person's situation, which is always entirely different. So even if I say, okay, I've advised hundreds of startups on HR, I still don't know everything about your unique situation and what you're going through and what nuances exist. And so there has to be an appreciation for that and knowing what we don't know. And then I think compassion is just this sort of action. It's the action orientation where compassion is about helping someone to, relieve their suffering, right? It's that sort of we versus me, and being in it with whoever is going through whatever they're going through. And I've read some crazy statistics about founders saying, I think only 10% would actually go to their investor and share something personal or bad news or a difficult situation. Only 10. That's really sad because these are supposed to be the people who have your back, who are in your court, who are going to help you out. So I would like to change that. I think that needs to change.
Yes. I mean, what you just described with all three, it's such a like components of such a healthy dynamic, but I don't see that very often right now. I'm sorry to say.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you're taking this on, because I feel like it's more fear about those checks stopping, and there's a big and
there's
just
a lot of image management.
Yes.
Right? You have to, oh, I don't want anybody to see me vulnerable or think that I am not in control. And so we hide things, we mask, and then that just it's almost impossible to have a strong relationship. Imagine if you're not your true self with anybody, whether
Right.
it's a friend or a partner. So these are basic relationship 101 skills that sadly, I think we just haven't put enough focus on over the years because there's too much focus on, what's the show me the money, right? Let's look at the
Right.
financials as opposed to the real human elements that are harder to grasp and measure, but they're so much more meaningful.
I bet. And I bet when you like approach things this way, you must be seeing some good outcomes, right? Some like good
Amazing.
relationship. Yeah.
Incredible. I adore our founders. I think we
Mhm.
have so many that are doing incredible things. And I am always honored when I hear that they are having great relationships with our investors. And I do think that by the way, it's modeling that is something that your, partnership needs to do because it also internally is, we were talking about cultures earlier. Venture
Mhm.
capital firms also have cultures. All
Right.
organizations, all groups of people have a culture.
Right.
And in the venture culture, if your leaders at the top are not demonstrating these kinds of values and living this way, then it's really hard for the, junior people to follow suit.
Right.
So I think leading by example, just having great relationships with founders, being the first person that they want to call, that
Right.
says a lot. And that it's also a responsibility.
Mhm. So, if you're a founder listening to this and you're not, not feeling this way, you're feeling like you've got to keep, the perfect image. I got it. I'm fine. Everything's going great to your investor, but you're struggling because not all VC firms are, practicing this. Do you have suggestions or places they could go for help?
Yeah, I do have some suggestions. And first, let me start by saying it's hard for anybody who has gone through a fundraise and has maybe been rejected 100 times before they get one yes.
Yeah.
And what if that yes comes from an investor who's not values aligned? Do you take the
Right.
money? Do you not take the money? I mean, this is not like a
Right.
simple thing for a
No.
founder to just be like, oh, yeah, I'll be picky until I find the right one. Um,
No.
so I think my advice is first know that you're not alone, just full stop. Everyone is going through this. I don't care how many people are crushing it on their blogs and profiles and press releases and whatnot. Everybody is going through these struggles. So just like knowing that is really important. And then I think speak up, talk about it. It's got to start somewhere. As much as I'm sure people are listening, like, yeah, right, there's no way I can speak up about it. Finding ways to speak up about it, getting help so that you can speak up about it in an effective and productive way is important. And a good coach can help you raise
Mhm.
conversations that your investor is going to appreciate because, even though the power dynamic might be one way with the check writing, as soon as you're the one running the company and they're behind the scenes, you have
Mhm.
more power in terms of information and what you share. So kind
Mhm.
of know that power too, and
Mhm.
know that you have a lot of value in being open and honest with your investors. And then I would just also say, consider, raising your expectations about what a good investor should be like
Mhm.
and what they can offer you, and be picky and be choosy. And this is like a partner for life.
Mhm.
It's like a
Yeah.
marriage. You're not going to,
Right.
marry the first person who says yes. Making sure that you've really identified somebody whose values aligned.
That is such great advice, and I just don't hear that enough, and so many people are just about the check amount, and it's kinda like that when you're very young and you're looking for your first job and everyone's telling you, "You need to be interviewing them too. You're gonna be working there. You're gonna
That's
be"
right.
right? And we all learn the hard way, "Yeah, I have to ask questions, otherwise I'm gonna get stuck." I mean, I can see here if you're not looking at values and alignment and the culture of the VC firm and you're just looking at the check amount, this show is a perfect example of how
Yeah.
sideways it can go.
Percent. And I think, Kate, in the last couple of years, there have been situations where true colors have come out and
Yeah.
people have thought they were taking easy money, and it turned out to not be that easy.
Right.
So
Right.
if something seems like it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Right. Okay. That's great advice. Okay. As we wrap up, I always ask guests, where we can find more information for those listening. This has been really insightful and helpful. We've never really covered this topic this way on this show. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I think you could go to our website, which is flourishventures.com, and you can read more about how we operate, how we think about things. And I hope over time that there's more, we're going to put some more resources out there for the general population of entrepreneurs. That's something we're already exploring, because you shouldn't have to be funded by a venture capital firm in order to have good access to take care of your mental health and seek support. So that's coming soon.
Oh, that's great. That will be a good resource. Thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Me too. Thanks, Kate.
You've been listening to Startup Success. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. Like what you hear? Tap the number of stars you think the show deserves in Apple Podcasts. For more tools and resources for your own startup success, check out birkelandassociates.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.